Welcome to the King of Games 98. On this episode, Gran Turismo versus Pokemon Red and Blue. Welcome back, everybody, to our very special King of Games 98 tournament. A tournament in which we look at the great games of 1998 and pit them against each other for final supremacy. My name is Ozzy Garcia, and I will be taking the hosting share for the day. And joining me today is Geoff in the Netherlands.
Hey, hi guys.
And also Anthony Arriaga in the great nation of the Bronx.
But we're going into week 3 of this whole thing, and I am celebrating Christmas.
Time is meaningless at this point. So, as a reminder, if you like what you hear, make sure to go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Hopefully that's going to be 5 stars and not a troll review, because that makes us very sad. And if you really dig what you hear, then make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And finally, if you really like what you hear, then make sure to spread the word if you dig what we're doing. So we are now done with the round of 16 of the King of Games 98, this very special project that has taken on a life of its own and become much larger than we probably expected it would be. And there were some surprises and upsets in the last round, and almost all of them could be attributed to Arnie. So he's not here today, so I don't know. But now we enter the round of 8, and things will be ratcheting up quite significantly in terms of difficulty. All the games that advance are going to be facing a tougher challenge, because this is really now the cream of the crop, except for maybe one game that we shan't talk about. So the games that advance from this round will be going to the semifinal. And so the matchup for today will be Gran Turismo going up against Pokemon Red and Blue, which are absolutely 2 games for entirely different audiences. So this will be a tough matchup, so let us see how they come out. As a reminder, we'll be looking at 4 factors. The first is our personal experience with the games and how we feel about them. And the second is critical and sales reception, which does not matter a whole ton, but it is one of the factors that we take into account. And the third factor is to consider the legacy of these games and how they changed the genre. We can pretty safely say that all of the games in this round of 8 are pretty genre-defining, so it's going to be very interesting to take a look into this factor. And finally, the last factor is to take into account how these games compare to each other and which one we would rather play nowadays, which kind of factors into how well these games have aged nowadays. So, with that out of the way, let's go to the mat. Let's get it on!
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding.
Let's start with you, Geoff. What's your experience with these 2 games? What's your experience? Let's start off with Gran Turismo. You weren't on the Gran Turismo episode.
Yep.
So, I was, and I argued vehemently, for it. We had Kelly on for that one, and it faced Xenogears, and Gran Turismo ultimately ended up taking the lead to give a car reference. And Kelly was very mad at me for that, but ultimately, decisions had to be made. Yeah. Pretty much. I mean, I still feel bad about how badly I went against Xenogears. But Gran Turismo is now in the next round, and so I want to hear from you. What's your experience with Gran Turismo?
Yeah, my experience with Gran Turismo, I was very fortunate. I got a copy from Japan before it came to Europe. My dad brought home a DualShock and a copy of Gran Turismo. So it was actually the first time I had the PlayStation DualShock in my hands. So all my friends wanted to come over and try that. And Gran Turismo, that was... for me and my brother, a massive thing to have on the PlayStation. So my brother, he's not really a gamer anymore, but when he does game, he does racing games. So for him, Gran Turismo was the go-to game in the house. It caused a lot of arguments. And the second one and the third one, because I wanted to play, I was still probably playing Final Fantasy VII at the time. I was still probably playing other games, and then my brother just wanted to play the PlayStation constantly for this game to get all his licenses to unlock the Nissan Skylines and all this stuff. But it's still, I tried. I'm not very good at racing games. I'm good at the party racing games. No, not good at the party racing games. I can hold my own, I guess.
So you mean when you say party racing game? I mean, are you talking about like Mario Kart or what's...
Yeah, Diddy Kong, Mario Kart.
So can you just call them karting games, like kart racers?
Yeah, we can. Look, you can give them many names, I guess. Sports multiplayer.
I've never heard party racing games. That's just something that But this is the first time I hear that term.
The genius of it is that I knew exactly what he was talking about.
There we go.
No, it took me like 2 seconds. I was like, party racing games, and I went to Mario Party, and I said, "Is there racing in Mario Party?" No, I don't think so.
I guess it's like party sports games is Mario Tennis. It's basically anything that Mario's stuck on top of, but yeah, fair enough. But so Gran Turismo in our house was a big game that year. Sat alongside all the other ones we've spoken about in the series in terms of like Resident Evil 2. But I really felt that Gran Turismo was head and shoulders above anything else on that system, anything else on any system at that time. It blew us away, utterly blew us away.
How do you fare with the difficulty? Because Gran Turismo is one of those games that really upended the racing genre because it was a simulation, or at least a semi-simulation, and you really had to adapt. That's the whole reason behind the licensing, because it needed to instruct a new generation of players on how to properly race and follow the rules of the simulation itself. I personally had a ton of difficulty with it. I did not realize that you needed to brake. And so I kept just bumping. I was basically playing Mario Kart,
exactly.
bumping up against every corner, essentially.
Yeah.
So how do you fare with that? I mean, at that age, were you able to adapt to Gran Turismo?
Oh, I didn't know how to brake, and I was refusing to learn how to brake as well. I really struggled. I really did. It wasn't the game for me, but my brother was really good at it, so I would watch him play it. He made it look like a great game. Because my brother, he just knew how to drive. He understood racing. He understood driving. He understands cars still.
See, my experience with Gran Turismo is that, I would just rely on what people told me you could do later in the game and all the awesome cars you could race later in the game. Because to me, my entire experience in 1998, 1999 was basically like trying to pass licenses, essentially, and failing utterly. So I did not adapt very well. It was only until later that I realized that braking was a thing. But Anthony, let me ask you, what's your experience with Gran Turismo?
Man, Gran Turismo was that game, like in certain genres that we've come across where if you're not into that genre, there's certain games that make you a fan of that genre. So I always loved racing games, especially on, when consoles were released, because I always felt like those were the games that really showcased the graphics and everything of the consoles. Obviously, this came out a few years after the PlayStation was released, but there was so much hype about Gran Turismo that you couldn't ignore it. And every magazine you'd open up, there was an article, a layout, Gran Turismo. When it finally was released, I definitely picked it up day one. I think I did. And yeah, it was, I'm with you, man. Braking was a new thing for me. I was like, oh, okay. You can't just grind against the walls. Okay, that's fine. But I love the aspect of the licenses, though. I really did like that part of just trying to get that new license, to get that upgrade, to get that new car, to get those new tracks. It definitely put that carrot in front of you, so to speak. And it definitely left a hell of an impact on me, because I to this day, what was my first car in that game? A Honda Prelude. Yo, I'm still driving Hondas, so clearly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you really can't understate that, and this is something that was mentioned on the last episode, which is how much of an impact this game had on, the preference of people, for particular cars and brands. I eventually ended up owning a Mitsubishi Lancer Evo, and it was primarily just because of Gran Turismo. I wanted to feel how it drove, and I wanted to kind of compare, the simulation with the real life experience. Not very similar. Let me just put that out of the way. But it's really a game that, unlike, let's say, a Need for Speed, which was kind of my frame of reference before this, you could actually own an Integra or a Prelude. You couldn't really own, a Lamborghini Diablo SV, as you did in Need for Speed.
Right.
But with Gran Turismo, Honda Civic, I mean, that's that's probably the first car that we all own. I don't know about Geoff, since Geoff is over in Europe, but, I mean,
yeah, don't worry, we have cars over here. We have cars.
Oh, you have cars?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I really thought that all of you guys just rode around in bicycles,
The Honda Prelude was the Honda Civic of the 90s. It was that car that the car was nowhere near as much as the parts you buy for the car. So if you paid, you might have paid like $1,000 for your Prelude, but I bet you one of your rims was like probably $1,500.
And the other thing about it is that you can't understate, the effect on the retail market essentially that this game had. Essentially, Civics became pretty overpriced, because of something like Gran Turismo. I think a lot of games, a lot of cars had a bump in their stock, let's say, because of Gran Turismo. So, that's something that can't be really understated, that a game was able to cross over so strongly, into the real world. That's something that Pokemon probably has done as well, but in different ways. And with that segue, let me ask you, Anthony, because you're a clueless gamer on this episode. What's your experience with Pokemon Red and Blue?
None. No experience.
It makes perfect sense. That's our entire credibility there shot.
Right.
Just put someone on here, that has absolutely no experience with Pokemon Red and Blue. Well, what could go wrong, guys?
Nothing at all. Listen, here's the thing. I have a lot of respect for both these games. I have a lot of respect for Pokemon for certain reasons. I just, I was in that demographic that when Pokemon was starting to come out and be a thing, it just kind of escaped me. I was just like, people were trying to catch Pokemon. I was trying to catch dates with people, with women, so.
Yeah. Gotta catch them all, STDs.
Yeah.
That's what you were looking for.
Free clinics, bro. It's all good.
Bronx STDs,
HPV certified.
I don't even want to ask what type of, STDs those are.
This COVID got nothing on me. But,
no, of course. You were prepared 20 years ago, man.
Dude, I'm the cure. They haven't found me yet, but I'm the cure.
You have the antibodies and everything. Yes. But I guess no. Okay, you don't have a ton of.
I don't have a ton of personal experience, but
can you be objective? I think.
That's my thing here. See, I came into this thing very objectively. So fear not, Pokemon fans. If I don't choose your game, it's your fault, not mine. So.
I don't know how that can be. Just listening here is like, man, I feel very judged right now. I guess, Geoff, let me ask you, what's your experience with Pokemon Red and Blue?
Yeah, so I was in that key demographic. I was 14. I had a Game Boy. It'd been quite quiet on the Game Boy scene for a couple of years before then, though. 97 wasn't a particularly great year. But then when Blue and Red came out, it was major news. It was huge. And I didn't quite get why. It took a friend of mine to pick it up. He picked up Red. And it took like a lunch break kind of thing for me to play it, to see what it was about and what was going on. None of us had played a game like that before. It was incredibly Japanese to start with. But so I picked up Pokemon Blue quite quickly after that. And I got hopelessly addicted to this game. I think I spent most of the Christmas of '98 playing this, and I was completely besotted by it. I thought it was fantastic. Pokemon itself, that first generation, with the cartoon, with the anime, and then with all the magazine press, everything that was going on, all the TV adverts, it really sunk its claws into me. The one thing I'm glad I managed to stay away from, though, was the trading cards. So I managed to steer clear of that. Because I can get hopelessly addicted to
which
stuff.
Was probably hard because everyone had the trading cards, and if you went to any school, it was across the whole spectrum. I mean, it really wasn't confined to just, the nerds, quote unquote. Everyone was kind of dealing with this. And I guess along those lines, because I wasn't on the Pokemon episode, which I would have liked to be, because I think, I could have made a very fine argument, against Pokemon, which I'm not going to make now because now I have to defend Pokemon in order to, give a fair shot to both games. Yeah. I was actually in the key demographic as well. I mean, I was 10 in 1999, so Pokemon had come out a year after, and so I had just arrived from Cuba in 1999 at the end of that year, and so everything at that point was new to me. Mm-hmm. And, I had all these cartoons, I had all the Saturday morning cartoons, so Dragon Ball and all these other amazing animes and series, and one of those was Pokemon. And Pokemon was huge at the time, and so you had the original cartoon, and I would wake up every Saturday morning to see it, and, my experience with Pokemon was basically that, the cartoon, and it was only until later that I was able to actually play the game, and I think it was one of my friends lent me Pokemon Red, and I think I just kept it for months, and I eventually gave it back to him because I kept wondering what the hell happened to my Pokemon Red, and I was like, oh, it wasn't mine. So, that's how kids are, when they're like 10 or 11, they just keep things. And, I mean, I did not get the hoopla about the game itself. But I did love the cartoon. I was absolutely in love with Pikachu. I thought he was fucking adorable. And, that kind of segued very well into, once I started playing the game, I had this familiarity with all the different Pokemon, like, Onix and Charizard and all this, awesome Pokemon. And I became, like you say, Geoff, like hopelessly addicted to it. It must have been the first game that I put probably over 100 hours into. Because at the time, I really wasn't into RPGs or anything like that. I mean, I did not, spend a lot of time with one particular game. It was just kind of like, as you are as a kid, you go from one game to the other, depending upon how you feel in that particular mood. You don't really focus on like, okay, let me get the most out of this game. Even though I did kind of have like a completionist kind of thing, I wanted to make sure that the games I did have that I could actually beat, but it just didn't work out.
Did you collect them all? Did you catch them all?
No, I didn't. I must have ended up at like, I don't know, like 110 or so because... I wasn't very social, so I was very shy about kind of telling people, hey man, let's link up. So I can get that Gyarados, I'm missing Gyarados. I wasn't like that, so I was very shy. So I didn't do that. And so I was at an intrinsic disadvantage with respect to that. But yeah, man, I mean, this game was cracked to me. I love this game, and I could see how, for someone in, their 20s or 18, probably as Anthony was, this whole thing was just like a fad.
Utter nonsense.
This is what the kids are doing. Right. I kind of feel like the same way about something like Yokai Watch, which was a huge thing for a brief time there. And I was like, I don't know what this whole thing's about, or even Minecraft, or I don't know, like streaming nowadays or Twitch or... Yeah. Okay, let me just stop right there. I'm just going to start naming all the things that make me feel.
But every generation has this thing like similar.
And I think that's where Game Freak know that because I think every Pokemon game is for the same demographic each time, but people get older, they think, well, this isn't the Pokemon I loved. It's like, well, this Pokemon isn't for you. Pokemon for you was Pokemon Gold. Pokemon Sword is now for these people, so stop complaining that it's not for you because it's not made for you.
Yeah, whichever one you played first, your first exposure to Pokemon is almost like Doctor Who. Like your first Doctor is always going to be your favorite Doctor. Yeah. That holds true as a Whovian. And with Pokemon, it's like, okay, if your first Pokemon was Pokemon, I don't know, Black or Diamond or whatever,
exactly.
And you were the right age at the time, then that's going to be the Pokemon for you. And that's the beauty, I think, about the series, is that it can reintroduce itself constantly, to new generations, and it still holds that kind of carrot and stick, approach of like, getting people sucked in,
exactly.
To this world and getting them really hopelessly addicted, as Paul said, and making them, terrible human beings. I'm
Definitely.
I'm just kidding.
It happens to the best of us. Don't you worry.
Yeah. I mean, and so for me, I was like you, Geoff, in that demographic. I mean, I'm 3 years younger than you, I think. So, sorry about that, guys.
Wow.
So I'm in that demographic where, I had that crack and I made sure to take advantage of the crack.
Yep.
And it's funny because when you look at these two games, they look like they don't really have a ton in common, but they really are about collecting them all. I mean, you do want to get to that point where you buy that awesome, Corvette, or you buy that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's weird because Gran Turismo, compared to other series, because of licensing reasons, they didn't have like a Ferrari, for example. So, the higher end cars, were kind of like the Formula cars, etc., or like, the rally cars, etc. But yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, it's two games about collecting. But, in terms of like my personal experience, I find that I have fonder memories of Pokemon, strangely enough, which is weird for me to say, as the resident crank of the show. I have fonder memories of Pokemon than I do of Gran Turismo, which, again, it's just interesting. I mean, I guess that's a question for you as well, Geoff. I mean, do you have fonder memories of Pokemon than you do of Gran Turismo?
Yeah, I think personally, I would say yes. I respect the hell out of Gran Turismo. A phenomenal game when you think of what the standard that it set for racing games, which were there was so many racing games at the time, and it really set an incredibly high bar. But for me personally, Pokemon was just so much fun, so accessible, and it gave you that addiction. And when you're a kid, you love collecting, buying stuff, just like I do today. So it really, I think that Pokemon is that real. It really scratches that itch for most kids. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, but let's talk, in particular about Red and Blue itself. I mean, because there have been many Pokemon games afterwards, and Red and Blue kind of feel quaint by comparison. Do you think that, Pokemon Red and Blue should be looked at, in the context of all the games that came after? Or should we judge it based on what essentially is a very simple game with very simple mechanics, but with a very good feedback loop? I guess, Anthony, let me ask you that question, and hopefully you can answer it objectively.
Well, it's funny because I'm talking to my son the other day, and I don't even know what got him into randomly playing a Pokemon game. I really don't remember why, but he commented on the simplicity of it. Just the simplicity of the gameplay, the graphics, just everything. And he just enjoyed it for that. So when I think back on like what you guys are talking about with Pokemon Red and Blue, I think you have to base it just off of what it was then, because it was just a simpler time then, like.
Well, I mean, it's also the fact that it was the first introduction to many an RPG like game. Yeah. I mean, it was essentially an introductory RPG, because, many kids were not playing, let's say, Suikoden, at the time. I mean, you had to have a certain age, in order to grapple with the mechanics of a game like that. But with Pokemon, you essentially had 4 attacks or moves, with respect to your Pokemon, and you had essentially 6 party members, which were your Pokemon, and you mix and match with them. So it was a very good introduction to, the RPG genre itself. I mean, what do you think about that, Geoff?
That's a good point. I think that, you're building a cast, you're building you're making sure you're balancing out your strengths or weaknesses, knowing that you're going to be coming up against varied foe. When you're going into a water or fire-based region, what the deal is and how you need to prepare. So yeah, I definitely think it's a great insight there to say that it probably does teach a lot of kids how to kind of strategically think, how to approach a situation and how to take advantage of somebody's weakness or something's weakness.
So let me ask you then, with respect to Gran Turismo, do you think Gran Turismo should be knocked a few points, etc., because it had that much of a higher barrier of entry. Do you think so, Geoff?
What do you mean by a higher barrier of entry?
I mean, it was a difficult game, for people. Yeah. I mean, if you didn't understand the mechanics of the simulation, or you couldn't really grasp, what the game wanted out of you, then it was essentially impossible to play.
Yeah, I guess you're looking at, again, those demographics. Who's the game aiming for? What's the target audience? Pokemon is taking advantage of kids being kids, of being easy to manipulate, easy to control, easy to get them addicted to stuff. And easy to kind of constantly give them that, the old stick and carrot kind of thing. Whereas Gran Turismo is very much for, you would say, teenagers to late teenagers, people who already have an interest in racing. Definitely, I reckon, if you go back now, I'm sure the second-hand shops after the first month were stacked full of of copies of Gran Turismo, because I'm sure a load of people were just like, I've actually got to drive. Like, if I want to drive, I'll go and drive a car. I don't need to drive. I want to play a game. I want to have fun. So I can imagine there would have been a lot of that sort of initial, oh God, it's maybe not for me. Whereas the people who, like I said, my brother thought that it was the best thing since sliced bread, and finally, thankfully, there's a racing game that actually delivers what I want as a gamer, and that is that real simulation experience. So this is me trying to not knock it points, because I think that it does what it sets out to do incredibly well, and the people that wanted it would have bought it, and a bunch of Johnnies and Jimmies and Sallys, 12 years old, that's not for them, right? So if they pick it up and play it, of course they're going to find it tough. Even I found it tough. I was 14. So not docking it points, I'm going to be on the fence about that. Okay.
All right. So, who do we give the edge here on this factor? I mean, it sounds like Pokemon kind of gets the edge, right?
In terms of personal attachment?
Personal attachment.
Oh, well, for me, personally, it's going to go to Gran Turismo. Yeah.
Yeah, well, for you, it's Gran Turismo. Yeah. For me and Geoff, it sounds like...
personal, yeah.
We're Pokemon. Yeah. I mean, so we have, a majority here saying Pokemon. So I guess then, we go over into critical and sales reception. And, and these two games were juggernauts, but, we're talking about terrific sales in terms of Gran Turismo, and then we're talking about astronomical sales in terms of Pokemon.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we have lifetime sales for Pokemon, red, blue, yellow, green, whatever. It's $31 million, 31 million copies worldwide. I mean, that's
ridiculous,
absolutely massive. That's Super Mario Brothers 1 numbers, and that was a pack-in. So that's compared to the 10.85 million for Gran Turismo.
Chump change.
So,
which is huge for a PS1 game.
Absolutely huge. For sure. Absolutely huge. I mean, in fact, it is the best-selling game on on the PS1.
There we go.
Yep. So it cannot be faulted. It's right up there with Tekken 3 and Final Fantasy 7 in terms of the best stuff. But yeah, it's as of March 2013, it is the best-selling PlayStation game in a system that sold a ton of hardware. So both of these games, I think, when you look at them both respectively in terms of sales, I mean, it's really, Pokemon just gets the slight edge simply because it just did so well. But Gran Turismo, I mean, in its ecosystem, really did as well as anybody could have hoped. Yeah. Do you agree, guys?
Oh,
yeah, I don't. It's a hard. I mean, you can't fault either one in the critical reception department. I mean, sales are sales. It's almost unfair to compare Gran Turismo to the Pokemon sales, but like you mentioned, Ozzy, in its ecosystem, it's like you said, it's the highest selling PlayStation game. So
and then when you look at the rankings itself, I mean, here that's where things start differing a little bit, because Gran Turismo has a Metacritic of 96, which is. We're talking about Ocarina of Time levels of, critical reception.
Oh, wow.
There.
Well, Ocarina of Time, yeah, wow.
Yeah, that's massive, and you had a perfect 10, from the UK PlayStation magazine, which big surprise the UK loves a PlayStation game. And with Pokemon Red and Blue, you have an 88% in game ranking. So I think that the rankings of, the critical reception of of Pokemon was a little bit more muted, because I don't think reviewers who skewed older, were really cognizant of the massive effect that the series would have on the popular consciousness. And
right.
So, when you take a look at this compared to, let's say, Final Fantasy VII, you say, okay, this is a lot simpler. I get it, it's meant for kids, but it's not revolutionary. And so that's why you end up seeing good receptions, but you don't end up seeing, universal hailing of the franchise like Gran Turismo did, for example. So, when you look at Pokemon, Red and Blue, Famitsu gave it a 29 out of 40, which seems very quaint. It's weird, for such a big magazine to basically have a pretty, I wouldn't say mediocre, but just okay reception for a game that would become so massive.
Yep.
So I think it kind of equalizes at the end of the day. Pokemon Red and Blue had the slight edge in terms of sales, but Gran Turismo had the edge in terms of the critical reception.
Yep, right.
What do you think about that, Geoff?
Yeah, so I mean, when you're looking at both consoles, two of the highest selling consoles of all time. You got on the PlayStation, I think we've said it so many times in the past, but the competition on the shelf in the stores is so strong about what game do you pick up. As I kind of mentioned, I felt like, for my personal opinion, back in 1998, especially late 98, there wasn't a lot of other Game Boy games to go and buy that were that hyped.
No, and the Game Boy was pretty much on its last legs. I mean...
Yeah, exactly.
Nintendo eventually went in on the Game Boy Color, because Pokemon essentially gave it another shot in the arm of adrenaline to the original Game Boy, which by this point was a system with, like 18-year-old technology, essentially.
Yeah.
Which was insane. And
it's a technical marvel what they were able to do with that console, Game Freak. It was incredible. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that the slightly lower scores, this is par of the course for Pokemon games in general. They rarely ever get 10 out of 10s because they're games for kids to get addicted to. They're not, and this is where we might lose some listeners, I don't think they're really incredible games. They're just insane.
No, they're not. I don't think so either.
It's just the marketing is genius. The characters of G1 are incredibly well designed, especially for the anime. They look brilliant. It's a bit like Yokai Watch, like you mentioned earlier. It's like, hell, if I'm going to play that, and I don't understand why anyone would want to, but kids love this stuff, and it's easy to market, it's easy to sell. Nintendo, we've said this in the past, when they get something that's decent, they will really go all for it when it comes to pushing it in front of people's faces. And we've also spoken about Nintendo gamers from that era. They would take anything they could get because they weren't getting a lot. So this is where it's like, this sounds like I'm really trying to be pro Gran Turismo here, but I do think Pokemon, the ecosystem is a really important thing to think about. The world it exists in is very much a bubble, and it's like an echo chamber. And if you say, even today, if you say anything bad about Pokemon, then people think that you're a hater, and it's like, no, they're just objectively decent games. They're not incredible games. They're just decent, addictive games.
Yeah, I mean, and let's not forget the feedback loop. I mean, the feedback loop is extremely addicting. I mean, that's the whole point of gotta catch 'em all. I mean, it's getting kids to get that next fix of, okay, let me keep going into that grass to see if I can catch that Jigglypuff that Paul so much loves. So it's huge. But then again, you think about the fact that, the Game Boy had essentially a 9-year head start in terms of a built-in audience. People were buying Game Boys since 1989. And so this was in almost every house at the time. And, thanks to Tetris, even, grandma, played the Game Boy. And so when you compare that to the PlayStation, which was only 3-4 years into it, it had less time to build up that audience. And, for people with a Game Boy, they could just buy this brand new game when, in fact, there was almost a complete drought of Game Boy games at the time. So it makes sense that Pokemon, sold so well because, people had Game Boys and people wanted games for it. So, you put that 2 and 2 together and it works great. I mean, what do you think about that, Ant?
No, I completely agree. I think when you're looking at the reviews themselves for the game, and you made the point, and I was thinking the same thing, was that the people reviewing the games are older adults and looking at this Pokemon thing like a little, like whatever, little kid RPG thing. But yeah, a lot of people overlook the install base, and man, it's remarkable. Remember, I know it's been mentioned before, but if you have a certain amount of an install base and you get 10% of that install base to buy a Pokemon game, in this case, look at the numbers you're getting.
And you also have an element here, which I don't want to forget because I can't miss an opportunity to knock on the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 did not have a ton of games either. And so if you had a Nintendo home where what they essentially had was a Nintendo 64 and a Game Boy, you're not getting a ton of stuff on the Nintendo 64, at least not until later in the year, when Ocarina of Time is released. And so you're like, okay, well, let me take advantage of Pokemon, which is this new Nintendo game.
Right.
That's another element that maybe, we hadn't thought about and that maybe, factor into it.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that about 5-10 minutes ago. I do think it's important that we don't disparage Nintendo fans too much in this chat, but definitely in this time it was you all own GoldenEye, Mario Kart, Ocarina of Time, and probably Pokemon. It was just, what else are you going to have?
Right.
Yeah. And so I guess, can we say that this is a tie essentially for this factor?
I mean, we spoke so much about Pokemon and not as much about the success of Gran Turismo. I think critical acclaim, it needs to go to Gran Turismo because it is a superior game. When you're talking about like technical game, it is a superior, incredible game. Sales is where it starts to even out. So for me, I'm still going to edge towards Gran Turismo personally.
What about you, Ant?
Yeah, I think, like Geoff said, we spoke so much about Pokemon, but it was almost to defend it. No, but not in a bad way. I just mean like we're trying to give it like, this is why it's this is why it's that. But Gran Turismo, we kind of just said, yep, great reviews. And like Geoff just mentioned, on a technical level, this game is just, I mean, it was a template for anything future-wise in driving games. So I got to go with Gran Turismo.
I mean, it's just taken as common wisdom that, okay, Pokemon sells a ton, and Gran Turismo was very well received. It's like, do we need to say more?
Right.
I mean, but I think when you take a look at it, the edge that Pokemon has is just the fact that it sold 31 million copies. I think when you look at the fact that Gran Turismo was the best-selling game on the system, and the fact that it was better received critically, I think, in my view, that makes it more impressive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Cool.
So that gives Gran Turismo the nod for this factor.
Oh boy.
I guess let's talk about the legacy of these games and how genre defining they were. I think with respect to Gran Turismo, I mean, it essentially created a genre.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say, Geoff?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the first of its kind, and today people are still enjoying the series and enjoying games like Forza. So Gran Turismo was the Yeah, it was the birth child of a very important genre for video games. Like Ant mentioned, like now when you get a brand new console, a lot of people look to, okay, let me see how good the racing games are, because that's the level that people now kind of go, if it's not realistic, then the system's not good enough.
Right.
And I think that's a great testament to the longevity of Gran Turismo here.
Yeah, I mean, and the console manufacturers, Sony and Microsoft, they essentially need to have their own simulation. So Sony has Gran Turismo, whereas Microsoft has Forza. And, Forza's kind of put up there, with every kind of unveiling of any new system for Microsoft. And, the direct lineage from Gran Turismo to Forza is absolutely there. So what do you think, Ant, in terms of Gran Turismo's genre defining, what do you think, makes Gran Turismo so enduring in that sense?
I think because up until this point, for the most part, we had, like you said, like arcade racers. We had Need for Speed. We had Ridge Racer. And this definitely scratched that niche for people that wanted a little bit more. And I don't think we've looked back since. I think, right?
Well, and I guess let me ask you a question, and sorry to interrupt you, Ant. I mean, do you fault Gran Turismo because it essentially led the way in kind of killing the arcade racer?
No, I don't think so. I think there's room for both. I just feel that.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, I think there's room for both. I mean, there's, you don't want to play and this, for any genre, you can play a heavy RPG game, you can play a heavy sim game, and then you kind of just need to just unwind and just have fun. So if I play Gran Turismo, I might be like, all right, cool, I need to take a break. Let me play some Daytona now. Like it goes both ways. But right, if with Gran Turismo, you saw the like you said, the lineage of Sega GT, and then you saw Forza, which is now like the sim racing game. And I think, yeah, man, we might not be seeing any new Gran Turismo games per se, but we are seeing its DNA in a lot of other games.
I guess, let me ask you that, Geoff. I mean, because the way I see it, yes, there's room for both, but we've eventually gotten to the point where even the Need for Speed games have a pseudo-simulation feel. And I think that can be directly attributed to the influence of Gran Turismo. We don't really see pure arcade games anymore, except for, what you call the party games, essentially.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's, I would say, a negative in terms of genre defining, but it still makes a genre defining. Well,
yeah.
What do you think about that, Geoff?
Yeah, all of my racing game experience is by watching my brother. He's just so good at them, bastard. And when I think about, like, especially like Need for Speed, he really got into that on the PlayStation 2 when you could start customizing. And I think that when you go through that, and I think then the Burnout series kind of it was another hybrid where you've got like a racing game, but it's also a bit arcadey because it's very short, full of accidents and crashes and all the great stuff. So it's definitely become a blend for a lot of genres. I think a lot of developers would have realized that Gran Turismo has set a bar in terms of not only technical prowess and not only realistic, realism, but also of giving gamers more choice when racing. And we even see it with Mario Kart today, right? You can select the wheels, you can select what glider type you want, what kind of car you want, all these kind of things, where we're just starting to give that choice because that's what people want, because they want to be able to pick and choose and to tweak and to make their little alterations. And for sure, Gran Turismo wasn't the first game to ever offer customization, but I think that it definitely did that for racing, where it was said, right, you can have a racing game, but we're gonna really let you just slightly tweak and tune, because that's what great racing car teams like your Ferraris, like your Mercedes, it's all the Formula One stuff. Even in your Daytonas, you get in your NASCAR. It's all about the mechanics behind the scenes, making the tweaks as well as it is the driver. So yeah, it's. I think arcade races had to change because consoles were caught up so fast with the arcade and started pulling ahead. Another racing pun for you. And I think they had to adapt. And I think the ones that couldn't are the ones that kind of got left on the scrap heap.
Yeah, I mean, and, I think there's also another element to this, which is that, just as Pokemon did a lot in order to pull in new gamers into the RPG genre, I think Gran Turismo cannot be ignored in terms of what it did to bring in gamers. Well, not gamers, but bring in people that didn't see games as anything other than a toy. It allowed, a degree of seriousness to the medium that I think was probably lacking before. I mean, you could enjoy a Need for Speed, but at the end of the day, that was still very much a game. Fun, and having that thrill was, the most important factor, rather than saying, okay, this is going to be, as good a simulation as we can give you of real cars on real tracks, etc. So it probably pulled in a lot of individuals that would not have otherwise gotten pulled in because they saw games as a kid's toy, I would say. Right. So I guess let's jump over then to Pokemon, Geoff. I mean, because we've said that essentially it's a very simplistic game, but it did create a genre in a sense, which was let's just call it the gotta catch 'em all genre. That you just had this loop of just having to catch all this, tchotchkes, in this case, pocket creatures or pocket monsters as they called it. But at the end of the day, it still was very much a simple RPG, in the Dragon Quest mold. So what do you think in terms of, the genre defining aspect of Pokemon? How do you think that kind of stacks up?
This is a tricky one because it is essentially an RPG, and they've been around for a very, very long time. Like that kind of that loop that we're talking about, which is the gotta catch 'em all genre loop that it kind of created. There's probably lots of games before that people are probably shouting at us right now that probably did a similar kind of thing that we're not thinking about, because we got to remember as well, this came out in Japan in 1996. So you got to think that it took nearly over 2 years to come to the West. There's a lot of games that never ever made it over to us from Japan that were probably very similar, but Pokemon just managed to kind of do a little tweak that got everybody addicted, all the kids addicted. So I think that on one hand, it created a series which we're still talking about today. Some of us aren't playing it. I know lots of people in our age groups who are still playing Pokemon. A load of people in my office, I remember, were going crazy when Pokemon Go came out. And we're talking about like guys in their 50s who were now hunting Pokemon for a good couple of weeks. So
let me give you an example of that. Let me just step in, Geoff. I mean, as I've said before, I'm an attorney and I work at a law firm. There were partners, with their phones playing Pokemon Go on the bathroom stall. I mean, wow. That's, and that's an entirely different conversation because Pokemon Go is another entirely separate phenomenon. But, to be fair, the lineage starts here with Pokemon Red.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I guess that goes well into Legacy. Which of this game, Sam, do you think has the stronger legacy? Because in the case of Gran Turismo, its legacy is still being felt nowadays, and its legacy has crossed over, as we have said, into real life, where individuals have become race car drivers because of Gran Turismo. I was about to say Pokemon, goddamn. And essentially, Gran Turismo is synonymous nowadays with racing in real life.
Yeah.
Compared to Pokemon, where essentially this game was the foundation for a cultural craze. Who do you think has the edge here?
Well, like you said, it's the Gran Turismo legacy still being felt, but the Pokemon legacy, we're still seeing it. It's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's not like no one's saying, "Oh, this game reminds me of Pokemon." No, people are like, "Have you played the new Pokemon? Have you gotten the new Switch with the Pokemon freaking controllers?" I think legacy wise, you have to go with Pokemon.
What about you, Geoff? What do you think?
This is a really hard one. Really hard. I've been really racking my brain to look at it from different angles. I think when you look at wider society, Pokemon has been a cultural phenomenon that probably even my parents are aware of and know about. Whereas Gran Turismo wouldn't. Like if I said Gran Turismo to my dad, he'd think of an actual car from the US. He'd think, oh, you're talking about cars. It's like, yeah, I'm talking about a car video game. They're like, I don't know what you mean. So, whereas they all would recognize. They wouldn't know he or she's called Pikachu, but they know what a Pikachu is.
Right? Yeah.
So I think culturally, Pokemon has had more of an imprint. Within gaming, I think that's where it's a bit more even. Not too much, because I think Pokemon is a phenomenon, and you can't dispute that. It is something that people will continue to play for generations, and we're going to be very old men looking at scores of kids running around playing Pokemon on their virtual... I don't know. I can't even begin to try and predict what people are going to be playing in 50 years' time.
Oh, it'll just be holograms by then. It'll just holographic Pokemon running around. Yeah.
I can tell you the future, we're going to have Pokemons inside the home, via hologram.
Yeah.
And they're just going to spend the time with us, and you're going to be eating, and then an Onyx is just going to come in and sniff your food, see if he, if you can give him some or something. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a very, very scary world. I don't know if I want to live in that world.
So I guess then on the to speak about Gran Turismo, because I think Pokemon's an easy one to talk about the cultural imprint that it's made. But for Gran Turismo on the gaming side, yeah, we've said it a few times already. It created a genre in its own right. It made developers of racing games look at themselves and say, we need to do better now. The competition is here and we need to react to this. And I think we've gotten now so many good racing games, unbelievably good racing games. You've even got Formula One drivers playing a Formula One game when they're doing their practice sessions. It's that realistic. And I think that is... I think there's a very large legacy as well. But for me, when you put them head to head on this one, Pokemon does edge it. It has to.
I mean, real quick, I just wanted to ask if you bought a Pokemon game back then, you basically already had a Game Boy. I wonder how many systems Gran Turismo sold if you didn't have a PlayStation. Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. I don't know. I actually can't.
Oh, no. What? No. What? Ozzy. No, but I think
but it was a console.
Let me call Casanori right quick. I'm gonna text him real quick.
No, but I think Gran Turismo was probably more of a system seller.
Yeah, big time.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. I guess in my case, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking about this. I really want to give them a tie, but I can't, because I have to make a decision. But I think that, Pokemon is no slouch in terms of how genre defining it was. I mean, yes, it's a simple RPG. Yes, we had been playing RPGs since Dragon Quest, since, I don't know, Wizardry, whatever. But it did it in a way that was fresh. It did it in a way that was accessible to gamers. And it popularized a genre that essentially is still going strong to this day. Gran Turismo created a genre. It's great, but, when you look at the legacy, I would say in terms of genre defining, they're pretty neck and neck. But then when you look at the legacy, just Pokemon just has to take an absolute edge there. So I would say, yeah. I mean, we have agreed that Pokemon should get the edge, at least with respect to this factor that doesn't matter. So let's kind of finish it up, guys. Let's look at this game's head-to-head, which is, I think, what we've been doing so far. Which games would you rather play? Which game would you rather play nowadays? Anthony, I'm pretty sure I know your answer.
Oh, well, I don't mean to be, so obvious, but it's funny. I'm looking at the notes, and okay, so I'd rather play Gran Turismo right now, but I think. When you it says we have the question, which do you think is the more important game? And I objectively as I'm trying to be here, I have to go with Gran Turismo here as well because of the points that we made previously, how it redefined this specific genre and the games we're even playing now, racing wise. I think it's that. I think the edge goes to Gran Turismo here. It's the more important game.
Yeah, I mean, and before I jump into Geoff, I want to mention something. In terms of what this factor should measure is, how well has this game aged, essentially? I mean, in terms of Pokemon, all the games that came after, refined, the mechanics to the point that going back to Pokemon Red and Blue feels very weird. It feels very strange. I don't know if any of you, I know you haven't, Anthony, but if you've gone back to it on the Nintendo 3DS re-release, it's kind of shocking how much slower it feels and how basic it feels in comparison. It's not a game, I think nowadays it's very enjoyable, once you have gotten a taste of what came after. I think that even just, a few years later when Pokemon Gold and Silver came out, that automatically made Pokemon Red and Blue obsolete, particularly when you take into account that the Kanto region was included in Gold and Silver.
Yep.
Whereas, when you look at Gran Turismo, I think you could still go back to that game, and that game holds up bang up. I think that game still holds up extremely well.
Yeah.
Yes, there have been, subsequent installments that have refined the mechanics of the simulation. They have made it a lot tighter, but it's still very much the same enjoyable game that you played back in 1998. You don't really have to you don't have to put your 1998 goggles, in order to enjoy that game. Mm-hmm. Yes, the graphics are a little bit more outdated, but if we're talking about outdated graphics, then Pokemon is just bang up losing. Because that game, looks very, very old. And let's not even talk about the screechy, sound of the Pokemon, which I still don't get. So I think that Gran Turismo is a game that you can still go back and play. And even better, it's a time capsule. It's a time capsule because it allows you to play with cars, from the period, and it allows you to see what was, essentially the benchmark, for that time period.
Yeah.
So I kind of tipped my hand there. But Geoff, what do you think in terms of both these games? Which one would you rather play?
So Pokemon is a Red and Blue Pokemon. Yeah, the points have been made, which I'm going to have to repeat, but at least so then I can kind of work it through my brain. If I'm going to play Pokemon Red again, I'm going to play Pokemon Fire Red on the Game Boy Advance. It's superior in absolutely every way. I tried going back to Blue not too long ago, and I'm like, oh, this is not really that much fun. And I know there are better versions of this, so I'm going to play the better versions. And I think that's where the game falls down for me. Because when my immediate reaction is to say, I'd rather play Pokemon today, but I wouldn't be putting in the original cart. I'd be putting in a different cart. So that's where it's like, no. I need to think about these two specific games. And I think if I'm going to do that, I'd rather play Gran Turismo today.
I guess then let's go for all the marbles, I suppose. Which game gets to advance in your eyes? And let's just recap. In terms of personal attachment, we said Pokemon.
Right.
In terms of critical reception, we gave the edge to Gran Turismo. In terms of legacy genre defining, we gave it to Pokemon. And in terms of head-to-head, we gave it to Gran Turismo. So that's pretty much even.
Right.
So I guess, now you have to make a choice as to which one gets to advance.
Hey, man, I started off driving a Prelude, and I'm driving a Honda still. I'm going with Gran Turismo, baby.
All right. Fair enough. What about you, Geoff?
I have to make sure I'm super clear here to our listeners. We're talking about the exact games. We're not talking about the franchises. We're not talking about the cultural side of things. We're talking about the game itself. We're not talking about Pokemon Gold. We're not talking Pokemon Sword. Sorry, we're not talking about Gran Turismo 5. We're talking about the original games. Original games, head to head. It has to be Gran Turismo for me. It is it's a better game. It's a better game. Full stop. It got better scores for a reason, because Pokemon is an addictive collecting child's game. and Gran Turismo.
Stop right there, Geoff. Stop right there.
I love the way Geoff started off by saying he gave this whole argument like, okay, listen, guys, this is what I mean here. And then once he gave his answer, he was like, fuck this, I'm blowing the roof off this thing now.
Yeah, you should have stopped like maybe 30 seconds earlier.
I'm not the one who shits all over, all the Square Enix guys and Miyamoto. I have respect for people in the industry.
Oh, fair enough.
Okay.
Okay. So I think this is set, but let me just give you my reason. I really do think that, if you take a look at cultural phenomenon, and if this was a popularity contest, Pokemon would go all the way to the end,
exactly.
And this contest would be absolutely meaningless.
Right.
Exactly.
So I think that's why we have to be very objective here. And that's why we have to kind of separate, the cultural legacy and just make that one of the points. But just like, sales reception is not everything and critical reception is not everything, so too should not, the cultural impact be the sole thing that measures whether a game gets to advance or not.
No.
And I think, in order to do that, you have to take a look into the game in a vacuum, and see, that particular game, how it stacks up. And when you take a look into that, I do have a very strong affinity to Pokemon, but at the same time, Gran Turismo has to get the edge.
Right. And I didn't pick Gran Turismo because I've only played it. I actually came into this recording thinking I was going to vote for Pokemon. I really did. But you guys did a terrible job of convincing me otherwise, so gotta go with Gran Turismo.
And that's the thing. The intent wasn't to convince you to vote Gran Turismo. I think we really tried to kind of be fair to both. Obviously, I've just pulled hot water on all of the gamers out there. But it is incredibly important to know that, I love both franchises. I respect them. I think we all do. And I think, Ozzy, you're right. We've got to be objective here. And I think we're going to be saying this for all the other episodes because we know people are going to be upset.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we are in the cream of the crop, except for one game. So, we are going to be pissing off quite a few people with every single episode that we go from here on out. And that's something that we just have to accept. When you have a matchup like this, when you have these brackets, hard decisions are going to have to be made. And we're going to have to look at this objectively. I don't think we can be faulted for not being objective. I think that we gave Pokemon a very fair chance, I think, in this episode.
No, we did. Yeah.
I think ultimately when you take a look at it, Gran Turismo, baby, Yamauchi's brainchild has to advance. So Gran Turismo, congratulations. You get to go on to the semifinals.
Right, there we go.
And,
well done.
And let's give a bow to Pokemon.
Valiant effort.
There were a lot of people worried that Pokemon was just going to ride based on its popularity. But as you can see, there can still be upsets. Even in the age of coronavirus, we still have brackets, we still have matchups, we still have the madness.
Right. This is March Madness. This is real.
Miracles can
This is the only March Madness right now. We are
recording this in March, so we managed to get some March Madness into our lives just before it ended. So let's give a bow to Pokemon. You did great things.
Well done.
But we have to wave you goodbye. So with that out of the way, that's gonna be all for us. This is one of the shorter episodes because we can't spend forever talking about these games. So let's finish this up. You can find us on Instagram. That's usually where we are. That's Arnie helming our Instagram account, and you can talk to him directly, and he's gonna relay whatever information you guys want to relate to us. If you want to tell us that we are absolutely insane and that we deserve to die because we picked Gran Turismo over Pokemon, it's not something we want to hear, but we will take it. So go to Region Free Gamers Podcast, on Instagram. You can also find us on our website. That's regionfreegamers.com. We usually have articles there, whenever we have the time to do it. So make sure to check it out from time to time. Also, we're on Twitter. That's Region Free Gamer without the S. Again, I want to remind you all, if you like what you hear, make sure to go to Apple Podcasts and give us a review, hopefully 5 stars. So my name is Ozzy. You can find me at Shadow the Collector with periods in between on Instagram. Geoff, we can find you at G-Spot Gaming.
Can indeed.
And Anthony, we can find you at Polybits _. So with that, we're going to be signing off. Thank you, Pokemon. Congratulations, Gran Turismo. Until next time, see ya.
See ya.
Fear not, Pokemon fans. If I don't choose your game, it's your fault, not mine.